Jack, how much time have I got?
Every series, every episode.
We need to find out from these bodies who attacked them and why.
Silent Witness from the very beginning. All episodes streaming now, only on BBC iPlayer.
It's not sexual. It's a meeting of minds.
Linda believes in love. She's passionately romantic.
Here's Fanny.
It's life only about love. So you aspire to being wicked and adulterous, do you, Linda?
No. I aspire to true love.
You can't say that her life isn't exciting.
This is BBC One in the East. Now the BBC News with Sophie Rayworth and Janine Machin at 10 o'clock.
Tonight at 10, fears grow that the deadly violence between Israel and Palestinians could escalate into all-out war. This is just the beginning, says Israel's Prime Minister, as his military destroys another tower block in Gaza.
What should I say? This is a crime. They were civilians, a woman, her children, a barber and a shop owner. They didn't hit a militant nor an official. We are civilians sleeping in our homes.
Another barrage of rockets are fired from Gaza into Israel today, mostly at Tel Aviv.
Why do they want to kill us? It's madness, this thing. This can't be. People lost their lives here.
Tonight, President Biden said Israel has a right to defend itself, but hopes the violence will end sooner rather than later. Also on the programme. A full public inquiry into the UK's response to the coronavirus pandemic will start next spring. Relatives of some who died say that's too late. The Prime Minister apologises unreservedly after an inquest ruled 10 people killed in Belfast in 1971 were entirely innocent. 9 were shot by British soldiers. Italy asks for help as thousands more migrants from Libya make it across the Mediterranean amid reports that tens of thousands more are waiting to make the journey. And one of the most famous names on the high street, Debenhams, closes its doors for good after 250 years of trading.
Here in the East, responding to the region's mental health crisis, the dedicated team set up to support you. And meet the mayor, day one in the job, and he answers your questions.
Good evening. The UN has expressed fears of a full-scale war as the deadly conflict between Israeli forces and Palestinians continues for a third day. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Palestinian militants that this was just the beginning, threatening to strike with blows they haven't dreamed of. Tonight, President Biden said he had spoken to Mr. Netanyahu and said he hoped the violence would end sooner rather than later. At least 65 Palestinians, including 15 children, and 6 Israelis are reported to have been killed since Monday. In the past few days, Palestinian militants have fired a mass barrage of rockets into Israel, including on Tel Aviv. And Israel has carried out a heavy bombardment of Gaza, launching hundreds of airstrikes. Tensions have been growing in Jerusalem, partly fueled by a long-running threat to evict Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. It all came to a head on Friday at Al-Aqsa Mosque. The site where it stands is highly sensitive, sacred for both Muslims and Jews. Israeli police used CS gas and stun grenades at the mosque, and Palestinian youths threw rocks at them. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Tom Bateman.
The world's asking if the region's on the brink of war. People who work to this feel it's already here. Palestinians in Gaza face the fiercest Israeli bombardment since the last all-out conflict. Israel says it's going after militant leaders. Some were killed in their homes. But civilians died in this strike, say Palestinian health officials. In Gaza, a territory under blockade, grief quickly turns to anger.
ناس مدنية مرة في قلبها مرة وولادها في قلبها وواحد حلال وواحد واعي هل انقصفوا لا انقصف مقاوم ولا انقصف واحد مسؤول احنا مدنيين نايمين في دورنا.
Dozens have died here since the violence erupted on Monday, and they're still counting their dead. Rocket fire from Gaza has continued deep into Israel, and the sirens are near non-stop in towns close by.
Okay, that's an interception. Let's get it. Jimmy.
As we've heard airstrikes pound the Gaza Strip just a couple of miles away throughout the course of this morning into the afternoon. More retaliation, more fire from Gaza. Under fire, Asher and his son Maor ran for safety, but their neighbour, an 89-year-old woman, didn't make it. She's seriously injured. Her carer died in the strike.
זה משגע הדבר הזה. זה לא יכול להיות. זה דבר, שמע, האנשים פה איבדו את החיים שלהם.
There are growing international calls for restraint, but for now, it seems that no one here is listening. It is the intensity of these attacks that has led both sides to say they will step up their strikes in retaliation. A descent into much further violence seems inevitable. More rockets are shot down in Israel's skies. Tonight, in a mixed Jewish-Arab town, I saw how fear and chaos is spreading. Violence between Jews and Arabs inside Israel is spiraling. Here, Jewish extremists attack an ambulance and then check a car to see if Arabs or Jews are inside. Along the coast, a popular Arab restaurant comes under attack. In another mixed town, a Jewish man is beaten by Arab Israelis. A synagogue has also been torched. Israel's leader calls it anarchy. A wave of anger that started in Jerusalem has spilled out to the occupied territories and into Israel itself. The country's engulfed in multiple flashpoints. It may be too late to contain it now. A curfew being enforced in one of those towns. It seems to be largely ineffective tonight. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he is now considering sending in army troops to some of those areas experiencing those kinds of confrontations. As to the wider military conflict, as you were saying, Sophie, the US President Joe Biden says that his expectation and hope is it should end sooner rather than later, while also saying that he believes Israel has the right to defend itself. But with more airstrikes pounding the Gaza Strip in the last couple of hours and more rocket fire within that time, that certainly seems, from this perspective, a long way off.
Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman in Jerusalem. Thank you. Well, let's talk to Rushdie Abu Alof, who's in Gaza City. And what's the situation there tonight?
The sound of bombs and airstrikes are continue shortly after midnight here in Gaza. It's been the longest day of fighting since years. Israel hit hundreds of targets, and Hamas, the militancy group, fired hundreds of rockets. This situation is leaving this place in a very grim sort of picture. People are suffering from the sound of sonics, the sound of bombing, a very angry and shocking mood to see the scale of destruction around the Gaza Strip after this very long day and very long night of fighting. And it doesn't seem the night is over yet. In the last 5 minutes, the Israeli airplanes have targeted a place in Khan Yunis. They are talking about also casualties in the place, and the latest health ministry figure is talking about more than 60 people killed. Half of them are civilians.
Rushdie Abuelov, thank you very much. Well, it's the worst violence in the region for 7 years. Tensions have been mounting in Jerusalem throughout the holy month of Ramadan. Our correspondent Caroline Hawley looks at what has sparked this deadly confrontation.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians hasn't made headlines in recent years, but it's been a tinderbox waiting to explode. The spark, Jerusalem, a city of sacred sites and simmering tensions, the heart of the conflict. And now, with depressing familiarity, it's ignited violence once again. So what's behind the latest escalation? Palestinian anger has been mounting for weeks. There have been clashes over a threat to evict dozens of families from their homes in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem in favour of Jewish settlers. There's also been trouble between Israeli police and Palestinians infuriated by restrictions on them gathering at the entrance to the Old City at sunset. And then, on the last weekend of Ramadan, came clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Israeli security forces said Palestinians had been throwing stones. On Monday, Israel accused worshippers of preparing to attack a planned march by Israeli hardliners, and troops stormed into the holy compound. Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip, is now portraying itself as the protector of Jerusalem, the defender of Muslim worshippers. It's called its barrages of rocket fire Operation Sword of Jerusalem. So why does Jerusalem matter so much? The importance of Jerusalem is perhaps the one thing that the two sides can actually agree on. It has both religious and national significance. The Israelis see it as their eternal, undivided capital, while for the Palestinians, they want it, or at least the eastern part of it, as the capital of their future state. But this latest escalation has gone way beyond Jerusalem. It's revived memories of the war in Gaza in 2014, which left more than 2,000 Palestinians and dozens of Israelis dead. That's the last time there was an explosion of violence on this scale. So what's been the international response? One of growing alarm. The UN Secretary-General said peace talks were the only way forward and must be revived. Boris Johnson and the Americans urged Israelis and Palestinians to step back from the brink.
We believe Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live with safety and security. And we'll continue to engage with Israelis, Palestinians, and other regional partners to urge de-escalation and to bring calm.
But for now, neither side show the slightest sign of backing down. And as so often, it's civilians on both sides paying the price. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
And there's more explanation of what's happening on the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk/news. The Prime Minister has announced a full, independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Boris Johnson said it would start next spring and would put the state's actions under the microscope. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, welcomed the inquiry but said it should begin as soon as possible. Our deputy political editor, Vicky Young, reports.
After more than a year of COVID trauma, what are the lessons the country must learn?
The UK now has one of the highest COVID death rates in the world.
Why weren't we better prepared for a pandemic? Were the right decisions made at the right time?
You must stay at home.
To protect the most vulnerable. And why did some things go better than others?
When you get the call, get the jab.
Will lessons be learned? Today we're a step closer to getting some answers.
Amid such tragedy, the state has an obligation to examine its actions as rigorously and as candidly as possible and to learn every lesson for the future. Which is why I've always said that when the time is right, there should be a full and independent inquiry.
The inquiry is due to start next spring and evidence will be given under oath. Fran had been married just 3 weeks when her husband Steve died of COVID last year. She told me she was pleasantly surprised when she heard today's announcement, but questioned the timing.
What we would like to have is a rapid review, and that's something that could be done in a matter of weeks, that wouldn't tie up people's time to the degree that a full judge-led inquiry would involve. And that would hopefully begin to get some quick answers to some of the very pressing questions that need to be resolved so that other families don't have the same experience as we've had.
But the government says doing it now would distract those still dealing with the pandemic. When it comes to the scope of the inquiry, the Labour leader had this request.
This inquiry will only work if it has the support and confidence of the families. And I urge the Prime Minister and the government to consult the families at the earliest possible moment. The government should also consult those on the front line who have done so much, whether in the NHS, social care or other front lines.
The families of those who've died want answers, and the Prime Minister has promised transparency. Ministers and officials will be quizzed in public. Thousands of documents will be published. But inquiries like this are never quick. It could be years, probably after the next election, before conclusions are reached. The hope is that looking back and learning lessons will mean no more names are added to this wall. But today, an international panel highlighted serious failures across the globe and said without urgent change, the world will be at the mercy of another disease outbreak. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, the latest data on coronavirus shows there were 2,284 new COVID infections reported in the past 24 hours, with 11 deaths recorded, all of them in England. More than 35.7 million people have now had their first dose of a vaccine. That's over 67% of the UK's adult population. And from 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, 38 and 39-year-olds will be able to go online to book their first jabs. Almost 18.5 million people have now had both jabs, so 35% of all adults are now fully vaccinated. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh is with me now. The variant that was first identified in India is of increasing concern, the Prime Minister said today.
That's right, Sophie. B1617.2, one of 3 Indian variants. There have been more than 500 cases now identified in the UK, a sharp rise over the previous week. A lot in the Bolton area, and many of those linked to travel back from India before it was put on the red list for hotel quarantine. We know that it's at least as transmissible as the Kent variant, which is the dominant version of coronavirus in the UK. The key question is, will it render vaccines ineffective? Well, it doesn't look like it, but we don't really have the data yet. On Monday, Chris Whitty, the government's chief medical advisor, said that it appeared less likely to be able to escape vaccines than the South African variant, another variant of concern. That's been around here since December, and it has never really taken off. It's vital that we stay on top of these variants of concern. There's surge testing underway in Bolton. A lot of cases picked up in people under the age of 25, which has prompted the Mayor of Manchester to ask for vaccination to be open to all those in the region over the age of 16. Mutated variants are the one thing that could derail the return to normality. But on the positive side, vaccines can be tweaked if needed. There are plans for a third booster dose in autumn, but only if required.
Fergus Walsh, our medical editor, thank you. Downing Street said tonight that Boris Johnson has apologised unreservedly on behalf of the UK government for the events that took place in Ballymurphy in West Belfast in 1971, when 10 people were killed in the wake of an operation by the British Army. Yesterday, the families of those who died won a 50-year fight to clear their names when a coroner ruled they had been entirely innocent. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy is at Stormont for us tonight. Emma.
Well, it was a big moment here in Northern Ireland yesterday when the coroner delivered those findings. For the families of the victims, they were vindicated. Their loved ones' names were cleared. But that's been followed today by quite some anger and confusion about the way the Prime Minister's statement was delivered. Now, almost immediately after the coroner's findings yesterday, calls began to grow for an official apology. Today, we were told that one came, but it didn't come in Parliament at the dispatch box or at an official press conference. Downing Street said that in a virtual meeting between Boris Johnson and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland, that the Prime Minister apologised there unreservedly for the events of Ballymurphy, and he apologised for the anguish caused to families in their long pursuit for the truth. But families of the victims really aren't happy with that at all. They would have much preferred the Prime Minister to reach out to them more directly, to give an apology in public. One relative tonight said that Boris Johnson's comments were an insult. Now, we've also heard from the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin. He has encouraged the British government to go further, saying there should be a comprehensive response and one which respects the wishes of the families. So it's rather an unsatisfactory state of affairs here tonight from the perspective of the families who lost loved ones 50 years ago. And many people will be watching to see how the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis handles this because he is due to make a statement in the Commons tomorrow. Sophie.
Emma Vardy, thank you. The UK economy shrank by 1.5% in the first 3 months of 2021, according to official figures. But it bounced back in March, helped by schools reopening and retail spending growing by more than 2%. Overall, the economy is still nearly 9% smaller than it was before the pandemic. Our economics editor Faisal Islam reports.
In Milton Keynes, as around the country, the curtain is about to rise again on our big screens, preparing for their grand reopening, testing the projectors, prepping the ticket machines, a symbol of normality and of economic recovery.
We know that there is pent-up demand. People have really been on their couches for too long, and they want to come out and experience films in the big screen with big sound in comfortable seats with cinema, food and beverage.
Today it was confirmed that lockdown saw a marked fall in the economy in the first 3 months of the year, but that a rebound had begun by March.
While any fall in the economy is clearly disappointing, this does reflect what was happening during the second lockdown in the first couple of months of this year. More up-to-date data shows the economy starting to rebound. The Bank of England's debit and credit card spending levels are at about 99% of where they were before the pandemic. And if you look at the number of people on the high street, the footfall data, that is at about 3/4 of normal levels as the recovery starts to take hold. And then there's the housing market, where during the pandemic year, house prices have gone up by a 5-year high, record mortgage lending, leading to house prices on average at over £250,000, also a record.
It's the jobs figures that matter, the Chancellor said on a visit to a brewery that has now returned all its furloughed employees to work. He'll stick to his budget plans.
Almost a year ago, we set out our plan for jobs, and what today's figures show is that that plan is working, and that is great to see. With regard to the decisions we've made, I think those are the right decisions. It's important that we have borrowing and debt levels that are sustainable.
But optimism about reopening tempered by caution given all that's happened over the past year, a pandemic and coping with some post-Brexit trading costs.
We did lose about 10% of our customers that closed their doors for good, so that that pain's already been met for some people. We appreciate how tough this has been for our customers. We have to pass those on, but we've had to swallow a lot. We've seen some issues with over the border as well. With ordering stuff in.
Exports to the EU were well down over the first 3 months of new trading arrangements, but ministers pointed to some recovery back towards more normal levels by March. The return of normality from trips to the cinema to trade with neighbours is right now the great hope for the economy. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Milton Keynes.
Italy is warning it needs more help to deal with the surge in the number of migrants arriving there via boat from Libya. Amid reports there are tens of thousands waiting to cross the Mediterranean. The main gateway is the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa, which lies between Sicily and the North African coast. More than 2,000 migrants have landed there since Saturday, with reports there are up to 70,000 in Libya waiting to make the crossing on overcrowded boats run by people smugglers. The situation threatens to overwhelm the island's limited facilities, and the EU is calling on other member states to help. From Lampedusa, our Italy correspondent Mark Lowen sent this report.
Shadows seeking the light of Europe. After days at sea, each step on land is controlled. They risked a perilous crossing from Libya, buffeted by high winds. And even though they're detained here in Italy and taken to guarded camps, they're safe and alive. By day, too, they arrive, more migrants picked up at sea, aiming for the island of Lampedusa. Over 2,000 landing here since the weekend. This gateway to Europe is under renewed pressure, battling the pandemic while carrying the hopes of the desperate.
6 years since the height of Europe's migrant crisis, they are still coming, in lesser numbers now, but this is the third straight day of arrivals. The question is whether this is just a temporary spike, or whether it is the start of a summer rush to Europe's shores.
We are here to welcome people, to say to the people, you are alive, but we also want to say to the people, welcome in Europe. And your rights are important to us. We take care of you. But in this moment, we don't feel this.
For the EU's frontier countries like Italy, migration remains an intensely political issue, and for some here, the hospitable welcome has worn thin.
Adesso è arrivato il momento di dire basta.
It's time to say enough after 30 years. I want the camp to be closed immediately and a naval blockade so that they can't access the island. They should be helped in their own countries, not come here where the authorities spend millions on them, but let us die.
Through Europe's outer door into a waiting room, but with the camp full, dozens are left outside. Many here will have asylum claims rejected, but it's unclear how many of those will actually be sent back.
You speak some English, yes? Okay. We can't speak to people.
No.
Non è permesso?
No, assolutamente. Assolutamente.
Okay, we're being told that we can't speak to the migrants.
But from inside the camp, the stories came to us.
The robbers come to your house, my own house in Libya, and rob me. Right now, this hand I can't use this hand and do something with it.
What about people who would say to you that you have come in an illegal way?
No problem. Let them say I come an illegal way because they don't know what happened. So let them say that. But if they ask me and they hear the main story, they will understand my pain.
It's hand to mouth here, but for some, this is better than what they left behind. And as long as dreams of Europe remain, many more will follow in their tracks. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Lampedusa.
The family of 9-year-old Jordan Banks, who died after being struck by lightning during a football coaching session, have described him as their brightest star. He was injured during a thunderstorm while on a playing field in Blackpool yesterday afternoon and was pronounced dead at hospital. The former Bosnian Serb leader and convicted war criminal Radovan Karadzic is to serve the rest of his life sentence in a British jail. The 75-year-old was convicted in 2016 of crimes including genocide, which he carried out during the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. The Foreign Office said he would be transferred to a UK prison from a UN detention unit in the Netherlands. 29 men have been charged in connection with child sexual exploitation in Calderdale in West Yorkshire. The allegations date from 2003 to 2010 and are against one female victim who was aged between 13 and 20 at the time. Most of the offending is alleged to have taken place in Calderdale, but some offences are said to have occurred in the Bradford district. The government's laid out plans for a new law that would result in universities and student unions in England facing fines if freedom of speech were not protected on campus. The new law could open the way for individuals to take universities to court. Here's our education editor, Branwen Jeffries.
Controversy on campus is nothing new, but universities are caught in a wider culture clash, facing a new law to enforce freedom of speech.
I don't want academics to feel intimidated. I don't want them to feel as if they're going to be silenced and that they're not going to be in a position to be able to voice ideas and views that may challenge conventional wisdom. You know, that's been too much of a chilling effect in terms of so many of our universities and our student unions across the country.
I spoke to one Catholic writer whose talk was cancelled at a university where she'd spoken for many years.
My views haven't changed in the slightest. It's more that society has moved on and people have become more culturally sensitive. But the only way that you defeat an idea, whether you agree with it or not, is to actually listen to it, to air it, and then, to attack its fundamental points if you disagree with them.
Universities are factories for new ideas, new ways of thinking, and they have a huge cultural influence through their research, through debate and their students. And that's why they're at the centre of the freedom of speech debate about what we should and shouldn't say about politics, history, race and gender. Some universities have strengthened their policies. They already have a legal duty to protect free speech.
I think there is a question as to whether or not this isn't a sort of sledgehammer to crack a nut. There isn't evidence of a huge problem. There are existing duties. And so I think what I'd like to understand more from the government is what additionally they're trying to achieve with this legislation. The notion that every disgruntled student or somebody who might have wanted to speak on campus or whatever can bring an independent action, and that the universities will get caught up in a kind of legal morass that could actually have a chilling effect on speech on campus.
Student leaders and lecturers agree. Doubtful a new law will change much. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News.
A service has been held at Westminster Abbey honouring the contribution and sacrifices of nurses and midwives during the coronavirus pandemic. This year's annual Florence Nightingale commemoration service was held as a service of remembrance. Members of the nursing and midwifery professions were joined in the congregation by the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary. Now, it's one of the most famous names on the high street, but all Debenhams stalls will close for good this weekend after 250 years of trading. The new owner, Boohoo, said the business will now run online only. A number of them closed today. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson has been speaking to two workers who've been with the firm for more than 20 years each.
It's an end of an era. It was a great place to work. Totally lost its way. This is a result of it.